We're very happy to take a call on this particular piece of legislation, the Telecommunications, TSO, Broadband and Other Matters Amendment Bill, a bill that the Labour Party will be supporting to Select Committee with some reservations. Mr. Speaker, I'm a bit of a technology junkie myself. You'd never would have. I know you'd never guess. I have to say, I was surprised by Melissa Lee's speech. I thought she was going to stand up and tell us that broadband was going to be good for Auckland because the criminals wouldn't have to go through Mount Albert. They'd be able to email each other across the Auckland Isthmus rather than having to travel through Mount Albert. So I was surprised to hear such a brief contribution from that member, probably symbolic of the campaign that she ran in Mount Albert. It was about on par with what she seems to be capable of in this particular House. Mr. Speaker, we've heard very little from the government about their broadband initiative. Their second major pledge at the last election. Broadband was going to revolutionise the New Zealand economy. It was going to be part of that great step change in the New Zealand economy that the national government promised New Zealanders at the last election. And what did we hear from Stephen Joyce? 3 minutes. 3 minutes was all we got from the dark prince of New Zealand politics, Stephen Joyce. Couldn't even come up with more than 3 minutes on his own major policy initiative. The man who wants to talk about the roads of national significance, he couldn't even come up with 3 minutes on his own, or the holiday highway, that's right, couldn't come up with 3 minutes on his own broadband initiative. Instead we got the B team, or maybe even the C team from the National Party, doing 90-second speeches each. We had that wonderful maestro of inspiration from New Plymouth, Jonathan Young, giving us his views on broadband for all of about 90 seconds. The short-term temporary Member of Parliament for New Plymouth, shortly to be replaced by the much more dynamic Andrew Little. He wouldn't struggle to find 10 minutes worth of things to say about broadband like Jonathan Young did. He would actually have something meaningful to contribute to this debate, and the people of New Plymouth will be much better represented in this House after the next election when Andrew Little is their Member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this initiative, this broadband, this package of initiatives from the government was their number 2 pledge at the last election. It was going to be the great big step change that was going to get New Zealand catching up with Australia. I look forward to Jerry Brownlee standing up in this House and telling us how this broadband package is going to help us catch up with Australia, because he seems to be struggling with that notion at the moment. Jerry Brownlee stood up and said, well, actually, we've caught up with Australia and we've made huge progress under this government, despite all the statistics saying exactly the opposite. Jerry Brownlee continues to bluster on and say, no, actually, we've caught up with Australia, despite the fact that their number 2 pledge, this broadband initiative, after 2 years in government, still hasn't made any progress. We're still not catching up with Australia. Jerry Brownlee seems to think that we could do. That we're already doing it. John Key, of course, thinks that the cycleway is going to be the major initiative that catches us up with Australia. So as people are biking along on their push bikes, accessing their broadband on their laptops that they have on their handlebars, we're all going to be catching up with Australia, and it's all going to be sweetness, light and wonderfulness, because this is what ambition for New Zealand is all about. It's about spending 2 years to finally bring a broadband initiative package to this Parliament, despite making it their number 2 election pledge. Why has it taken them so long? Why has it taken them so long? Because they are totally hopeless. They may as well have put Jerry Brownlee in charge of it. We would never have seen a broadband initiative had Jerry Brownlee been in charge of it. It would have gone the same way as mining in national parks. It would have, and how did that work out for the government, that other great step change in the New Zealand economy that they were going to make, mining in our national parks? It was right up there with broadband and the cycleway, all gone by the wayside, catching up with Australia. We're still waiting to hear that plan to catch up with Australia. No evidence of it any time in the last little while. Coming back to the importance of broadband, I think it is exciting that New Zealanders are getting in behind broadband, and there is a demand for ultra-fast broadband in New Zealand and in this country. But one of the key things that we have to think very carefully about is not just about getting the broadband to the door or to the gate, but actually making sure all New Zealanders have the opportunity to make the maximum possible use out of it. And I think that our education system plays a critical role in this. During the tenure of the last Labour government, we placed a large emphasis on getting faster internet broadband to the schools, to the school gate. But actually the next part is equally as critical, which is making sure that the schools are cabled and adequately resourced with computing and with the staff professional development, for example, so that they can actually make sure that the kids who are in the school are making the best use of that broadband. It's all very well to simply to promise, as the government are doing, to provide ultra-fast broadband to the home, fibre to the home, but actually, if all that's going to be used for is downloading movies and so on, is that going to increase, is that going to lead to the step change in the New Zealand economy that the government are promising? It's not. It's going to make us all a little bit happier. We'll be able to access our movies a little bit faster. But will that actually provide the economic transformation that the government purports to be advocating in putting forward this broadband package? Actually, a large part of that economic transformation is going to rest with education, and technology plays a huge role in our education system. And if we go back over the last 15 to 20 years, 20 years ago, schools might have had a photocopier. That would have been their sort of technological advance. A Gestetner machine. And the cost of a photocopier and a Gestetner machine is not that huge. Now they are expected to have computer labs, wireless networks, laptops, a whole lot of other technology that parents demand, that students demand, that teachers demand. And I don't think, this is my own personal view, and Trevor Mallard, I'm glad he's not listening, because he probably wouldn't agree with me on this. I don't think we've adequately resourced the schools to keep up with that major technology demand. And so putting faster broadband connections into schools isn't going to help them unless we actually give them the resources to make the best possible use out of that broadband facility. And I don't think we've yet done that. I think that one of the reasons it's really, the government haven't got anything to say about that. I'm not surprised. But I've beaten them into submission, according to Mr. Hodgson. But I think one of the reasons that broadband is very, very important is we're coming into a really exciting time of technology convergence, which I think has been a few years later than I had envisaged sort of 10 years ago, where we're seeing television, the internet, a whole lot of mobile technology all converging together. And I think, for example, of the iPad that many members of Parliament have recently been able to acquire. And that's using wireless technology, but that wireless technology, through the wireless network we have here at Parliament, hooks back into a broadband internet connection. And when I go home, for example, I use my iPad on a wireless network at home, but that wireless network hooks into a broadband internet connection. And I can tell you that the telecom broadband internet connections in Upper Hutt are not particularly flash. And it takes an awful lot longer for me to download stuff onto my new iPad at home than what it would take to download it here in the parliamentary complex. All work-related, I assure you, Mr. Speaker. It's completely work-related. But all of this, the new technology that we're now gaining access to, will rely on effective, fast broadband internet in order for us to be able to make the most of it. So we all have an interest in making sure that this is successful. So that's one of the reasons why the Labour Party will be supporting this particular piece of legislation that draws together a number of the government's key initiatives, the ultra-fast broadband initiative, the rural broadband initiative and the telecommunications service obligations into this piece of legislation. We're going to be supporting it to a select committee with some strong reservations, and as my colleagues have mentioned, we're opposed to the 10-year regulatory forbearance period. We think it's going to enshrine a 10-year holiday from price regulation for whoever wins the ultra-fast broadband and the rural broadband initiative contracts, and we're concerned we have concerns relating to the affordability, lack of transparency, the role of the Commerce Commission, and we have some real questions around telecoms inclusion in this process. So ultimately, the Labour Party is very committed to making sure that all New Zealanders have access to a much higher standard of broadband, and we're pleased to see it being progressed. We don't think that the government have made enough progress in this area, despite making it their number 2 election pledge, despite promising that it was going to be the cornerstone of the step change in the economy that they promised New Zealanders at the last election. But they haven't kept many of their other promises, so I'm not sure why any New Zealander would think they might have kept this one. They certainly haven't closed the wage gap with Australia as they promised. They've come up with the most they can come up with is a cycleway that's been mixed at best. A holiday highway is Stephen Joyce's major road of national significance. Finally, we are getting something out of them with regard to delivering broadband for all New Zealanders. It's not enough, and it's been far too slow in coming. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.